Hello and welcome to episode 41, the Dirk Nowitzki episode of the Mr. Douglas Sports Show. I'm your host as always, Corey Douglas. And I'm getting this NBA trade deadline video out a little bit later than I initially planned due to some work being done over here at the apartment. But I am here to break down this busy trade deadline in the NBA. There was a total of 16 trades involving 23 teams and 46 rostered players going in and out in different directions across the league. So let's go ahead and get it started. No particular order, but the first trade that went down was Cleveland going and trading JaVale McGee to the Denver Nuggets. So JaVale McGee goes home. JaVale McGee will now back up Jokic in Denver, add a little bit more athleticism to Denver's roster. The Detroit Pistons traded DeLon Wright to Sacramento. And I think Sacramento, that was kind of a move where they are looking to possibly get in that play-in situation. They currently sit at the 10 seed in the Western Conference. Another smaller trade, Washington traded Troy Brown and Mo Wagner to Chicago for Daniel Gafford and Chandler Hutcherson. And Chicago was very busy on this day. I think they are really trying to make a push because this next trade shocked me. I think this was the biggest shock of the entire trade deadline to me because I thought this guy would stay in Orlando for his entire career. But Nikola Vucevic goes from Orlando to Chicago, and Orlando gets in return Wendell Carter and Otto Porter plus several draft picks. And this is a move that tells me Chicago, they're trying to make the playoffs this year. If you look at the standings right now, they currently sit at the 10th seed, but they are not far off from the 4th seed. I believe they are 2 or 3 games back right now of the 4th seed. Let me just pull it up just real quick so I'm giving the accurate information. It's taking its time here. So we'll just pull it up over here. Give me 1 sec. So yeah, right now Chicago sits at 19 and 24. They are currently in the 10th seed, which is good enough for the play-in situation. But like I said, they are only 3 games behind Charlotte for the current 4th seed. And I think what you'll see in the Eastern Conference going down the back half of the season is you will see teams at 4 through 10. They will be interchanging and going up and down just depending on whether you win 2 games in a row during a week or lose 3 games in a row. It's going to be very tight, but I think Chicago has now positioned themselves with the addition of Vucevic to really make some noise and get into that postseason and possibly even host a home playoff series. Also in Orlando, they ship Evan Fournier to Boston for 2 second-round picks. They take Fournier's salary into their trade exception with the departure of Gordon Hayward this past offseason. So they add a little more depth there in what has been a very disappointing season for Boston. And then once again, staying in Orlando, they ship Aaron Gordon to Denver. Orlando gets back Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, and a first-round pick in that deal. And this is a great move, I think, to pair an athletic forward with Jokic. So now in the pick and roll defense, you'll be able to be more versatile as far as switching things and matching up with different personnel across the Western Conference. And I think Denver is really trying to make that run back to the Western Conference Finals and this time try to finish the job, because right now with the state of the Lakers with LeBron and AD both out, Denver has a chance. The West is wide open. Then Sacramento, they trade Bjelica to Miami. So Miami adds another shooter, and in return Sacramento gets Mo Harkless and Chris Silva, 2 guys that were not in the rotation. Now you have Bjelica, who can add some shooting, spread the floor there. Philadelphia made a move for George Hill. They were looking for a point guard. It was either going to be a guy like George Hill, which they ended up getting, or Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry ends up staying in Toronto, is not moved, and Philadelphia turns to George Hill as another veteran presence in that locker room in Philadelphia as they try to make a run to the finals this year. Of course, Joel Embiid is out right now, but he should be back here in a few weeks. OKC gets Tony Bradley and Terrence Ferguson and two future second round picks. And I think the winner of this deal is Tony Bradley. He'll get a chance to play more because obviously he was playing a lot now with Embiid out. But of course, when Embiid comes back, he goes back to that three-man rotation. Now he gets to OKC, and he should be able to find a little more time there. All right, so the next trade that went down, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Norman Powell goes from Toronto to Portland for Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood. And I think the biggest or the most interesting fact about this trade is, of course, Gary Trent's dad played in the NBA. He started his career in Portland. He got traded to Toronto in his third season while averaging 10 points a game after 41 games. And now his son starts his career in Portland, gets traded to Toronto after 41 games, averaging 10 points. So I found that pretty crazy and just an interesting stat. But I think Portland got better by adding Norman Powell, who's having a career season. And I think Gary Trent gets to a situation where he'll probably get paid a pretty nice bag, which I don't think Portland was prepared to do. I do think they'll be more willing to pay Norman Powell, but I think it's going to depend on how the playoffs shake out. Staying in Toronto, they send guard Matt Thomas to Utah for a future second round pick. To me, Utah is just stacking up on shooters, and they're one of the best shooting teams in the NBA already, so they add another shooter there. Then you got Rajon Rondo going back to LA, this time playing for the Clippers after winning a championship with the Lakers last year. And in return, the Clippers will send Lou Williams, Lemon Pepper Lou, back to Atlanta. So I'm sure he'll have those Magic City wings on deck. Going back to Toronto, they send guard Terrence Davis to Sacramento. Like I said, mentioned earlier with the DeLon Wright acquisition, Sacramento, they're trying to sneak up and stay in that 10th spot right now to give themselves a chance to make the top 8 and make the playoffs. Next trade is Victor Oladipo finally gets his wish to go to Miami. Miami sends Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk back to Houston, and this officially shuts the door on the James Harden trade. Obviously, James Harden was shipped to Brooklyn earlier this year to team up with Kyrie and KD. And Houston gets left with Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley out of that deal. So when you look back at this deal with James Harden, you'll look back and say this was probably one of the worst returns or one of the worst trades in NBA history. Because they turned James Harden, like I said, into Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk, which is absolute disaster. Boston traded Daniel Tice to Chicago. Like I mentioned earlier, Chicago is trying to make the postseason, and I think they're in a great position with Levine and Vucevic. I can't wait to see that pick and roll dynamic, and I think by the time the playoffs roll around, I think they'll be in good sync. They have 29 games remaining to work out the chemistry with that. And then the Warriors, they send Wanamaker over to the Hornets. Obviously, the Hornets are down LaMelo Ball right now. It's still kind of up in the air on whether LaMelo will miss the rest of the season or not, or be able to come back before the regular season ends. So that is another guard to add to that rotation there. And then the last but not least, let's bring it back to Big D in Dallas. They make a trade for J.J. Redick. They send James Johnson, Wes Uindu, and a second round pick to New Orleans for J.J. Redick and Nikolai Melli. So they add, obviously, Redick has a history of shooting. Melli has a reputation of shooting, although he's only shooting 18% from 3 this season. But he hasn't been getting a whole lot of opportunities. And my outlook on this trade for the Mavericks is I'm glad they did something, because I know I was sitting there staring at my phone about 30 minutes before the trade deadline on Thursday, and I was getting pretty irritated with Donnie Nelson and the Mavs front office of, not making a move. I feel like when you look at what Portland did and what Denver did in the Western Conference, 2 teams that are directly above you, 2 teams that you had an outside chance of catching, improving. I feel like you have to do something. Now, I don't think J.J. Redick is an over-the-top piece. I do think he will be able to have a contribution to this team because the amount of wide open threes this team misses is just absolutely ridiculous when you terms of Finney Smith and Josh Richardson at times. So it adds another shooter, and now it gives Carlisle the flexibility. You know, maybe Tim Hardaway can go back to the starting lineup, move Finney Smith to the bench, and that just provides more spacing, and then it gives you a defender on the bench. So we'll see what Rick Carlisle decides to do there. But like I said, overall, I do like the trade. Felt like the Mavs had to do something. I do think the Mavs will be locked in at that 7th seed. So they will, you know, they will have to play in that play-in scenario. Just a reminder, 7 and 8 seeds in each conference will play each other. The winner of that game gets the 7th seed. 9 and 10 seed will play a game. The winner of that game will take on the loser of the 7-8 game, and the winner of that game will be the 8th seed in each conference. So overall, like I said, I think it was a great trade deadline. I think when you look back at it, you have to say the biggest winners are Miami and Chicago. And I think, obviously, Chicago, I've touched on them. But I think Miami, by getting Victor Oladipo, it adds another playmaker on that team if he's healthy and buys into that. But I'm also factoring in they are the front runners to sign LaMarcus Aldridge in the buyout market. So I think when you get Oladipo, you add Belicia, and then you probably add LaMarcus Aldridge. I think you make your team a whole lot better. And right now, where they're currently sitting in the standings, they sit at the 7th seed right now after losing a tough game against Portland on Thursday. So we'll kind of see how far they can get up. Obviously, last year they went to the finals in the bubble as the 5 seed. So we'll see where they end up there. All right, and before I get out of here, I definitely want to touch on some of the Dallas Cowboys signings since we last talked. I'm just going to start off by saying, if you ask me today, are the Cowboys better than they were when they ended the season in New York, when they had a chance to make the playoffs? The answer is absolutely not. But if you ask me, are the Cowboys definitely worse than they ended the season in New York against the Giants? I'd also say absolutely not to that as well. So they made a lot of acquisitions. I'm going to narrow it down to 4 because I think a lot of them aren't going to even make the roster when it comes down to training camp. So the first signing is a defensive end previously of the New York Jets, Terrell Basham. He has 7.5 sacks in 4 seasons. According to multiple people that have watched him, his best season was in 2020. We'll see. Next is Brent Urban. He spent his most recent time in Chicago. People say his 7th season in Chicago was his most productive season. He set a career high with 36 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and over 369 snaps as a rotational role. Next is Keanu Neal. After missing the majority of the 2018 and 2019 seasons, he returned in 2020, played the full season, accumulated 100 tackles. He's going to play that linebacker safety role. I would expect most of his time to come at safety. And then the last and final signing, the next signing is DeMonte Kazee. I actually have 5 signings, so that threw me off just a second. But DeMonte Kazee, they signed him late in the week. From 2018 and 2019, he led the NFL with 10 picks at the safety position. But then last year, he tore his Achilles. So they always say the first year coming off a torn Achilles is kind of suspect. So we'll kind of see what kind of impact he can have. And then the 5th and final signing, they signed Jaron Kearse, who's mostly a special teams guy. We'll see, if he makes the roster, and if he does, he will be on these special teams. And I was going to get more into the NFC East, but I'm going to keep it short today, just because there's a lot going on over here. But next week we will be back and at our normal time on Friday. But until next time, salute.